Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, as per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Your continued support, as ever, is very welcome, and I'm glad you seem to be. Everybody seems to be enjoying the show. Get the occasional thumbs down, but well, I guess these things have a tendency to happen, and okay. Disagreement is healthy, as they say. So anyway, hopefully there won't be any disagreeing with today's episode of the show. I fancy doing something a little bit different, so we're looking at Jamaican and Trinidadian rum. I haven't done a rum episode of the show for quite some time, and you'll have to excuse me that a number of these samples are quite old, insofar, not necessarily the age statement of the rum, rather the spirit, the samples date from quite some time ago, and as you well know, I have buckets of samples in boxes and stuff, and this particular, well, it's sort of been, I've had these samples sat around waiting for the opportunity to do something with them, and as you can see, a number of them are bottled by AD Rattray. And back in the day, I mean 8-10 years ago, when I probably had a slightly closer working relationship with AD Rattray, I remember that they were actually one of the first independent bottling companies to start doing single cask bottlings of rum. This is well before Edition Spirits started doing the Kill Devil range, for example, and I certainly remember sort of Francis sending me the samples, or sending me a sample at one point. I think the first bottling they actually ever did, sent the sample at cask strength and basically said, "What do you think? Should I bottle at cask strength? Should I bottle at 46%?" And I have a feeling it was a bottle at 46% because the general consensus amongst the customers of AD Rattray was bottle at 46%. Of course, I said bottle the damn thing at cask strength, and hence, as you may well remember, I've mentioned in the past the fact that we did have a Caroni bottling. It was a 13-year-old, I think, and I got 12 bottles bottled at cask strength, and all the rest were bottled at 46%. It seemed to be a sort of a way that they would work. I mean, they would send the samples at the cask strength and say, "Well, we're going to bottle it at 46%," and some they did, and some they didn't. And it was really interesting to sort of get the sample at cask strength and then sort of like say, "Well, really, I think you ought to bottle it at cask strength." And anyway, it was an insight that obviously you guys, the consumers who purchased it at the end, wouldn't have seen. All right, I'm doing a bit of willy waving, I suppose, but I think it's just interesting, and I just wanted to sort of use these samples in an episode of the show. So I'll obviously speak about them when I introduce the lineup. Again, I'll keep these sort of the waffle brief as per usual, because obviously it's the juice in the bottle or the juice in the glass, as the case may be, that you're really interested in, because obviously information can be readily found. So I guess just time to introduce the lineup.
I don't like your face and your silicone.
Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with the Appleton Estate Reserve blend. This is the newest bottling. I think it was released in 2016. It replaced the 8-year-old, and I believe the spirit is roughly around about 6 years old, I think, in this particular bottling. So it'll be interesting to see how it fares. So the distillery, the Appleton Estate itself, is the oldest sugar estate and distillery in Jamaica, currently owned by Ray and nephew, and as an interesting distillation process, which I suppose you would sum up as triple pot distilled, or a one pass triple pot distill, which you have to look at a picture of the still to actually get the full understanding. But essentially, the first distillation, they take the 8% wash. First distillation takes place in the pot itself. So it runs over the linarm at around about 30%. It then passes into a retort, which is filled with 30% ABV spirit, and it bubbles through that. over another smaller linarm into a second retort where it passes through, well, the spirit by then is about 60% going into the second retort, passes through spirit that's at 75% ABV, runs off at about 80 to 90% ABV, and obviously that then gives the distillery quite sort of like a broad range of ABVs to play with, and but the actual reserve blend itself is bottled at 40%, so that should be a nice one to start off with. Second bottling we'll be looking at is the AD Rattray Monymusk, 25-year-old, distilled in 1986, bottled in 2011. The sample itself was at 63.1%, but like I was saying earlier, the actual bottling itself was at 46%. Now, here we have yet another wonderful quirk of the rum industry. As you well know, a lot of the names of the rums are keyed to the still rather than the actual distillery itself. So in essence, the still can kind of move around between buildings, different companies, and you can still call it a Monymusk because it's distilled on the Monymusk still. So the Monymusk still is currently housed in the Clarendon Distillery, which was built in 1949, so relatively modern distillery in sort of general terms, and it basically currently houses two pot stills. One is 20,000 litres, the other is 25,000 litres, and I believe, according to the blurb, that is the largest pot still in the Caribbean, or that's being used in the Caribbean. The distillery itself produces two styles of rum, a light low ester rum and a heavier high ester rum, and the way they produce that is initially in the sort of like the fermentation process. So the light style rum is basically fermented in stainless steel for about 1 day before being double pot distilled, and the heavier style sees about a month, up to a month fermentation in old wooden washbacks without dunder, but of course obviously that the wooden washbacks are going to have sort of like all the bacteria and what have you lurking in there to give, you know, a heavier, more flavoursome style of rum, and obviously then double pot distilled. And I would imagine that as they produce a number of different ranges at the Clarendon Distillery, they will use that together, sort of like the lighter and the darker style. Which leads us nicely on to the third bottling, which is the Smith and Kross Jamaican Rum, bottled at 57%, because yet again it is a blend of light, in this instance, heavy-bodied Vederberg style rum and medium-bodied Plummer rum, distilled at Hampton. Now, as you can remember, I did indeed do an episode of the show with the distillery releases, and it's a funky rum. It is really funky, and I don't dislike funky rum. Well, I don't dislike funky spirits, but I thought that the Hampton bottlings themselves just lacked a little bit of sweetness, just to give me some counterbalance. So it'd be interesting to see how the Smith and Kross fares. Right, so after that, now we're going to move on to the three Trinidadian bottlings, which are all from the Caroni Distillery, which is, well, that was closed in 2002. Interestingly enough, there was originally 50 distilleries in Trinidad way back when, which had shrunk to 8 by about 1950, and well, there's only Angostura left there, and that's because Angostura bought Caroni and promptly closed it because it's the competition, which to me is a bit barking, but there you go. I obviously don't own a multinational company, so basically what we have here is a 14-year-old AD Rattray. This is cask 134. Again, sample was at 63.4%. God, dear God, the alcohol levels today, I'm going to need to lay down after this. But again, was bottled at 46%. So it was distilled in 1997 and bottled in 2012. The next bottling we were looking at was actually bottled at its cask strength. Hooray! This was bottled at 64.3, again from 1997, and bottled in January of 2013, cask number 202. And finally, a non-AD Rattray single cask bottling. So this is the Edition of Spirits Kill Devil 1998, 18-year-old. This is bottled at cask strength, 63.2. Good, 18 years old and 63%. So yeah, this was distilled in December of 1998, bottled in 2000. I tasted it originally in 2017, sorry, I tasted it in July of that year. So yeah, really interesting tasting. Low esters and high alcohol, I think. Oh, that's the name of the show. Wow. Anyway, again, I'm coming up with the names of the show before we've even finished. Anyway, there you go. Let's make a start then, shall we? Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Appleton estate. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? Now, it obviously has a little bit more youthfulness than I remember the 8-year-old to have, and it's quite surprising how 2 years difference makes quite such a difference to the nose. It's still got that full-bodied, juicy Jamaican style, a little bit of almost agricole, just that slight herbal note, and a little bit of tobacco, ashtray, molasses, demerara, sugar. There's also a bit of vanilla, not a huge amount. Again, the oak is quite sort of subtle, and it's a lovely soft nose. It's a pleasant nose. It's always said typically Jamaican to me. See what that's like. A little lighter in style. There's a slight sort of almost Guyana-esque oiliness, but again, it's quite broad, it's quite juicy, lots of molasses, dried fruit, a little bit of spice. Like I say, a little bit lighter than I remember the 8-year-old, and I remember the 8-year-old to be quite a big and broad and fat bottling. That's a bottle itself. No, it was quite a broad style and had a real richness to it. I mean, it still retains some richness, and I found that as you went up the age statements, it became lighter in body, and it's nice length. I mean, it's about 20-something odd quid a bottle, so pretty damn good value for money, I think. Slight chocolatiness on the aftertaste, so yeah, that's a really nice starter, I think. Okay, so I don't think I'm going to be able to put any drop of water with this, unfortunately. But anyway, let's see what nose gives us on the Monymusk then. Oh, that is pungent. I mean, it has that sort of green banana, funky, oily, dried fruit character. There's a sort of, again, very much a Guyana oiliness to it. It's less broad. It's not as fat as the sort of the previous one, the Appleton estate. It's quite vegetal as well, and there's a little bit more oak, more vanilla oak. It's like I said, because it's leaner. A bit of white pepper now as well. I mean, this is really complex. I mean, this is a absolutely stunning nose, and I mean, I wish this had been bottled at 46 at its natural cask strength. But then, I mean, it really is quite leafy. There's kind of sort of celery sticks meets agricole herbs sort of note. I mean, it is really. It's pungent, it's intense. I mean, it's real rum at the end of the day. See what that's like. Oh, pungent, drying, herbal, alcohol, quite leafy. There's a slight sort of potpourri kind of note, which is a bit weird, but it is really vegetal and oily, and it's nowhere near as sort of voluptuous and fruity as the Appleton estate. I mean, it's intense. I mean, that's real rum for you, you know. I did leave enough to put a little drop of water with it just to see what happens. I must admit I can't remember, but let's have a quick look. It's still quite green. It kind of, yeah, I'm just trying to think of the other distillery it kind of reminds me of. And it's just not there on the back of my, it's just not on the tip of my tongue. It's Long Pond. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the Long Pond Jamaican, in that it's less broad, it's slightly more vegetal, it's slightly leaner. It's got some almost honeyed notes now. I mean, it's absolutely stunning rum, it has to be said. Let's see what the powers are now. Maybe not quite so funky, it's still got that slight sort of potpourri kind of finish to it, sort of herbally kind of peppery kind of potpourri, and a little bit of rose petal. Maybe not quite so much of the sort of green banana-y kind of esters, but it's still got a lovely pungency, it has to be said. So unfortunately, like I said, because this was bottled back in 2011, I don't think you're going to find any of that knocking around these days. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Smith and Kross. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh yes, no, that's a funky nose. Oily, dried fruit. Again, sort of, it's almost celery sticks. Black pepper, menthol. But there's a bit more sweetness going on here. I'm getting sort of demerara sugar, brown sugar, coffee bean, green banana. It's kind of like it's like Hampton, but just more balanced, in my opinion. Again, I mean, it is really intense. This is, you know, proper hairs on your chest kind of rum. You know, this is not your sort of easygoing sort of, you know, mixing rum. This is really intense. So it pass on. Again, funky, black pepper, alcohol. Oh, that's a hit on the finish, I can tell you. Again, oily, green bananas, bitter wood spice. There is a little bit more, well, not quite as much sweetness, but enough. I think it's enough. Slightly honeyed notes, just to sort of, you know, just balance it up and make it not quite feel so bitter and austere. Although that finish is pretty bitter, it has to be said. But it's got some lovely spices, it's got some dried fruit, and again, it is intense. And, you know, I think it's about 40 quid a bottle. I mean, 40 quid a bottle for a cask strength rum. I mean, alright, it's not majorly old. Again, I would be surprised if the oldest component in this blend is 6 years old. I would guess you're looking at anywhere between sort of like, you know, 2 and 6. Because it has that intensity, that youthful intensity. I'm going to put a little drop of water with it just to see whether that brings out any more of the sweetness or not. It pretty much doesn't really change the nose. Maybe it's a little more funky, a little bit more spicy possibly, but you've still got that sort of high-toned green estery sort of fruit notes. and menthol and pepper. Sort of pass on it. Now that's done the palate, in my opinion, a lot of favours. It's brought out the sweeter dried fruits, less bitterness now, obviously less alcohol. It's a little bit more palatable, shall we say, once you put that little drop of water with it. And it's still oily, it's still slightly funky, it's still slightly medicinal, it's still slightly mentholy, it's still got a lovely intensity, but it's just a bit better balanced with a little drop of water. So, and like I said, you know, for 40 quid, you know, oh, bargain. Okay, so time to tackle the 3 Caroni Trinidad bottlings. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. So this is the 80 Rattray 14-year-old. Big, intense, quite herbal, vegetal, lots of molasses, lots of weighty spirit. Quite a bit of oak, bit of dark chocolate, coffee, medicinal, walnuts, dried fruits. There's a slight, almost perfume note, a sort of floral perfume note. I can't quite put my finger on the exacting sort of flower. I'm not that great, you know, botany, it has to be said, but it's got some lovely sort of marzipan, raisins, sultana, smoke. Oh my god, that is a hell of a nose. I mean, that really is intense. So really heavy, but it's got so much depth. See what the pass on. Oily, tannic, woody, green wood, green nuts, green banana, but again molasses, real smoky aftertaste and finish. You know, it's ashtray licking. I mean, it's that kind of smokiness. It's an ashy smoke. I can see that. I think once we put a little drop of water, that it will fill out and it will flesh out, because it is a little bit taut, a little bit tight. But that's the alcohol. But it feels like the molasses and the rich fruit is kind of behind there. So I'm going to put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Yeah, it's quite a lot sweeter. We're almost more in the sort of Appleton estatey kind of end of the sort of fruitiness spectrum. Still got that sort of marzipan, burnt wood, black pepper. It's a little less complex now with a little drop of water, but it's still got a lovely depth and intensity, and I'm getting a little bit more oak now as well. That sort of, like I said, marzipan-y kind of almondy sort of character. So we'll pass on that. A little softer, a little sweeter again, maybe not quite so intense. It's got a lovely rounded kind of character now, sort of, you know, again the sort of raisins, the sultanas, the dried fruit, dried apricots, bit of banana, bit of toffee, bit of coffee. I mean, again, a wonderful length. Personally, I preferred it neat. I just loved the intensity, but you know, I think being bottled at 46% was fine for this. You know, it was still an absolutely stunning rum.
It's driving me mad.
So let's move on to the 15-year-old. So this was bottled at cask strength, and this was 64.3%. See what those give us, and you can see the colour is quite lighter. So, and the noses are lighter as well. It's slightly more high-toned. I'm getting more dried fruit. I'm getting papaya, melon, apricot, lime, pineapple. I mean, that's quite a high Ester rum. Little bit of, it's got a bit of a rawness to it. There's a raw sugar kind of note. There's a little bit of almost kind of lime and almost kind of lime citrus. Completely different to the previous bottling, where the previous bottling was kind of like quite dark, lots of sort of molassy, dried fruit and wood notes. This is more lighter, estery, and a lot more fruity. A little bit of vanilla in the background. I mean, yeah, you know, it doesn't smell like it's 60-odd%. You know, it smells like it is a lot lower in alcohol. Anyway, let's see what that's like. Again, lighter, estery, pineapple, melon, banana, lovely fruitiness, lovely length. It's very soft. I mean, that is just so drinkable. I mean, you would not feel that was 60%. It feels more like 46%, it has to be said. It is, the alcohol is so well contained. A little oiliness on the finish, bit of linseed oil, bit of kind of oily marzipan, almond, but it's that freshness, that citric note, sort of lime, not quite lemon, more lime kind of citrus, which is kind of keeping it really, really fresh. I'm going to put a little drop of water with it, but like I said, I really don't think it actually needed it, because it just does not taste like it's 60-odd%. It's probably bringing out a little bit more spice, a bit more oakiness now. I think also the spirit is, or the sample is kind of just creaking a little bit because of it's been spent so long in the bottle, rather than the spirit was creaking when it first was bottled. And that's often an issue. I mean, certainly I smelt them all earlier before I sort of started doing the video, and everything seemed fine. But let's see what the pass on it. Yeah, I think it's kind of like showing up the fact that the sample is now a little bit tired, because it's certainly nowhere near as impressive as it was when it was neat, and I don't think that was a kind of like how it would have been when it was originally bottled. So I just think that the sample is probably not showing at its best now once I've put a bit of water with it. But neat, absolutely stunning, and really intriguing to see, you know, how different the spirit is from the same distillery, and yeah, really good. Okay, and we're finishing on the Kill Devil 18-year-old. So let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Right, now as you can see from the colour, we're more like the 14-year-old 80 Rattray bottling. We're heavier, we're more sort of wood notes, wood spice, raisin, dried plum. Quite a lot of oak as well. I'm getting an almost kind of rye-like note coming through. There's a lot of oak character, and it's now sort of pushing through. I mean, it did start off with that quite heavy kind of molassy rum character, but the oak is really starting to come through quite powerfully now. There's a little bit of menthol, a little bit of sort of like herbal chocolatey kind of notes. but it is the oak is certainly sort of becoming more intense. Sort of pass on. It's kind of like the nose. It kind of kicks off with a dense, smoky, dried fruit, dark molasses, touch of treacle. Oak starts to come through, and it kind of like gets so far, if you see what I mean, and then sort of like there's a lovely citric note, almost a citric acidity that kind of stops it. It's got some lovely maturity. It's got that sort of beginnings of kind of like oxidized dried fruits. I mean, this could have carried on aging, I think, for quite a considerable length of time. But, you know, I mean, at this present, or at the time it was bottled, it's certainly absolutely gorgeous. It's got a tobacco-y, smoky aftertaste now, and that citrus still lingers, and it's got a kind of tongue-tingling kind of character, and so it's actually quite intriguing because it shows elements of the previous two bottlings. It's more like the sort of the 14-year-old with that sort of richer dark fruit and woodiness, but it has the sort of like the elevated acidity and or not quite so limey as the second sample. So yeah, really that was again really intriguing. Let's see what the nose is like now with a drop of water. Doesn't really make a huge amount of difference. It's probably got it's maybe a little bit more oak. I'm getting a little bit more sort of vanilla. Sort of pass on it. It's a little more herbal on the palate as well. I mean, herbally, rye, kind of oaky character. The sort of the richer dried fruits have kind of sort of like dropped off a little bit, and it's kind of emphasised the oak a little bit more. And it doesn't make it quite feel as complex. But you know, I think without a drop of water, I think really interesting and really quite impressive bottling. Okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Big thank you to AD Rattray and Hunter Lang for the samples for today's episode of the show. Speciality drinks for the sample of the Smith & Wesson, Smith & Kross. I'm not going to get that out of my head, am I? Anyway, so the Appleton Estate, it's an entry-level rum. It's good quality. It's not too expensive. It's got complexity, and it's probably been overshadowed by the other samples in today's episode, but still, I think on its own, an absolutely lovely rum. And same can be said for the AD Rattray Monymusk. Again, you know, really complex, really intriguing. Wish it had been bottled at cask strength as opposed to 46%, but well, you can't have everything, can you? The Smith & Kross, yeah, brilliant value for money. I mean, it's to me better than the Hampton Distillery bottlings. It has that balancing sweetness that I thought was missing from their bottlings, but certainly isn't with that particular bottling. And the AD Rattray 14-year-old Caroni, well, that was kind of classic what I think of as Caroni, but then you got the 15-year-old, which was just completely different. Higher ester, lighter, less woody, less dark, and just goes to show how rum distilleries can produce different spirits or different styles of spirits, and then they will all be back together, and you'll never see them unless the independents bottle these single casks, and then you get a kind of a snapshot of these sort of individual aspects of these distilleries. And like I said, with the Kill Devil bottling, almost kind of like a kind of hybrid, of sort of a mixture of the two, maybe sort of more in character with the sort of the darker, richer, more intense style, but having that sort of wonderful citric and sort of acidic kind of balancing note. And yeah, just a really intriguing tasting. And like I said, I know that the rum episodes of the show don't get so many views as the whiskey episodes of the show, but honestly, I urge you to have a look at rum. I mean, it is a lot more to it than actually meets the eye. And when you start getting into the single casks, the nuances, the fact that they have all these different stills, different production processes, you know, lighter esters and all that kind of stuff. It's really intriguing. It really is. And so I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. I really hope it will, you know, make you sort of go, yeah, I'm going to have a look at some rums. So all that's left to say is good afternoon and good ramming.